to reform whole societies. I mean, the European Union, the European Commission is very much characterized by this, because it is staffed by people who belong to essentially the transnational rootless elite, who don't actually have very many beliefs of a traditional kind, and are extremely irritated by the spectacle of a place like Poland and a place like Hungary. I mean, there's lots to be irritated about Hungary, no doubt. But you know, the European Commission is the first to be irritated, and will have reference to these vaguely defined human rights in order to make its position known, and that of course can produce enormous resentment. I mean, it has produced resentment in certainly in my country and in Poland, and it will go on doing so.
Okay, let me ask another question. You're talking about the EU. So in the European Parliament, I think not long ago there was some sort of a decision made that you couldn't use gender distinctive terms in the document. So no monsieur, no madame, no Fräulein, whatever else. Is this, of course we know there are now folks who think of sort of different layers of gender. So you can be male-bodied or female-bodied, which is an anatomical thing, as opposed to your identity, which would then be male or female. So does this idea also originate in that gender is not something you can observe with a rational mind and sort of know what it is, but it really is about your identity, your judgment of yourself?
Well, yes, this is another issue. It's very easy for these transnational institutions like the European Parliament to respond to pressure groups of small organized people. You know, obviously radical feminists from France in this particular case. And those people probably wouldn't be able to force their views upon the whole public of France through the normal democratic process, because then they would come up against the fact that the French people don't want to lose monsieur, madame, mademoiselle, and so on. Right. This is one way in which elites impose their views on majorities by using these roundabout transnational institutions. Although in America, the elites use the Supreme Court in the same way to bypass ordinary people's feelings. This has been obvious in the case of abortion, that the standard New York liberal position on abortion was made into a nationwide orthodoxy through the Supreme Court. Okay, it's moving back the other way, but that's something that just does happen. Many people say, well, it doesn't matter. You know, what does it matter whether we drop the word monsieur, mademoiselle, or whatever? But it's a bit like what happened in Turkey in 1922, I think, when Ataturk said the Turkish language must no longer be written in Arabic script. It's got to be written in the Latin alphabet. That's much more sensible and straightforward, and then it'd be much easier for people to learn it from the Western countries, and we could relate to Western countries much more easily. And it had a fantastic effect. It changed Turkish society in a radical way, but it cut Turks off completely from their literary past. You know, nobody in Turkey today can read any of the classics, except a few, you know, for highly educated people. Maybe that doesn't matter because the classics weren't any good, but I don't think that is true.
Right.
But in a similar way, but not less severely, American feminism, which is insisting on the feminine pronoun, is cutting off many people from the natural sense of the rhythm of English as used by those reactionary writers like Hume and Burke and even John Stuart Mill. That's a very good point. I don't think I've succeeded in defining moral relativism because I think it's so elusive a thing. One might say that a certain kind of conservatism which says that custom has a validity of its own, which is what you're saying, is very appealing. But it isn't a form of relativism because it is actually validating custom as such. It's saying, custom does have a value, and that's the way we look for the solutions. And these solutions have emerged from people's interaction over generations, and that's why we should respect them. This is something that Burke said in his reflections on the French Revolution, and really he was speaking about a very objective moral truth. That the answers to social questions are not invented but discovered, and they're discovered over time through the people's interaction.
But of course, different people perhaps don't discover them, and maybe have bad customs.
Yeah,
so when for example, and noticing these differences among peoples, I guess, as old as history, because Herodotus famously noted differences in some of the African tribes and in Eurasia. So how do you then treat different customs if you recognize them to be somewhat morally
This is
different?
what the Enlightenment wanted to do, was to, as I said, to find that position outside specific customs from which they could all be judged. And the universal doctrine of human rights was supposed to be that position. And my view is that perhaps it is, as long as rights are treated in this purely negative way that the American founders treated them, and as Kant treated them, and really as Aquinas treated them. But when the doctrine of human rights starts escalating without any grounds, then all you're doing is imposing a new elite morality on people who can't possibly accept it. But there are problems. As we know, most of us feel that there are aspects of many of the Muslim societies that we are becoming familiar with these days, which we can't accept. Forced marriage, honor killing, even perhaps the constant concealing of women. To us that is repugnant. But there is a question in many people's minds: if you then just impose the Enlightenment liberal morality on these communities, are you doing them a service or not? Right. There is a real conflict here, a conflict of values.
But of course, some of our customs they probably also think are repugnant.
Yes.
So then, what are we to do?
Well, the answer was that to send them back home, but you can't say that. You have to say, no, we've got to live together as communities, and they are right to be repelled by, pornography and all the things that they're repelled by in our communities, and we're right to be repelled by their treatment of women, right. And an accommodation over time might improve both of us.
Right. And on the same topic, in England, is the acceptance of certain forms of Sharia law within the British legal system, is that sort of a natural outgrowth of our wanting to treat their understanding of justice as similar or as equal to ours and as somehow compatible, even in the same nation?
No, because our nation is founded upon the rule of law, and this law has always been secular, and what the law is settled by Parliament and by the courts in obedience to Parliament. To say that there should be a Sharia law adjudicated in parallel is effectively to deny that there is a unified nation. The Ottoman Empire lasted in this way for a long time, saying that that family affairs are adjudicated by Sharia if the family is Sunni Muslim, or by the canon law of the Catholic Church if they're Maronite, and so on, and the Orthodox jurisdiction of Constantinople for Athens, I think, yes, for the Greek Catholic, and so on, and they managed it, but they managed it only because there were no nations. It was an empire without borders. We have the view that the ultimate source of authority is the nation state defined by its borders. And within those borders, the law, the secular law as determined by Parliament, is the final authority. That's not just an arbitrary thing for us, that is the foundation of our obedience. And if a community grows up within those borders not accepting that, then it doesn't belong within those borders. And there's no other solution. So
by endorsing parallel legal systems, then they are in fact rejecting
the nation state.
That's
yeah.
Exactly right. Okay.
It doesn't follow from the fact that our obedience is to the rule of law that the law can just be anything. There are internal constraints. Not only the constraints of democratic election to Parliament, but the constraints of constitutions and of procedures embedded within the law. And the problem with Carl Schmitt, one of the many problems with Carl Schmitt, was that he had, yes, but he had this kind of extremism of the time, of those terrible years between the wars, where he just wanted to, to put a guillotine through everything. Said, at a certain stage it stops, and he said he is leader who has the voice in the final voice in a crisis. That's for him the crisis is what settles who is in authority, and we English always had the opposite view. In a crisis, that's when you should look for the authority that has come about in peacetime. It's not the crisis that settles who is in authority, but the normal, peaceful dealings between people when there is no crisis. And the whole purpose of politics is to avoid crises. And on the whole, we English do avoid them very well. That's why we seem so complacent. And I think, I think that's the same is true here. That if you look back at people like Kelsen and so on, and the Austro-Hungarian tradition, although it's very different from the English, it is talking about the normal way of dealing with things and not the crisis. As I understand it, the Enlightenment conception of, well, there's no one Enlightenment conception, but the Enlightenment conception that the American Constitution embodies tries to set the state up as the thing which settles disputes. The thing which maintains the ongoing peaceable communion of people and represents their interests in the world as a whole, which means it doesn't in itself dictate to them all the axioms which they will need for day-to-day living. There is also a whole sphere of human life in which morality and religion play their part, but those